Professor Brené Brown's research shows that vulnerability fosters good emotional and mental health. It is a sign of courage. We become more resilient and brave when we embrace who we truly are and what we are feeling. The Vulnerable Scientist podcast is a space for scientists to tell their honest and authentic stories. I am your host, Sarah Nyakeri, who happens to be a scientist, informal science communicator, and I help scientists create personal websites. If you want to support this show, go to www.patreon.com/thevulnerable-scientist. You can also follow this podcast on all social media platforms at TV Scientist Pod. Hi everyone, welcome to the Vulnerable Scientist podcast. This is your host Sarah Nyakeri, and today's podcast is a solo podcast where I talk about the new developments concerning the podcast, where we headed and what we've achieved so far, and also just a how are you kind of thing for me. Yep, so let's go. So first things first, when I'm speaking right now, I've just bought a domain solely for the Vulnerable Scientist show, and it's called thevulnerablescientistpodcast.com, and I'm excited about that. I'm yet to design it. I'm yet to, just think about, what I'll put where, but content-wise, the website will help in terms of sharing content. That is the audio format. People who don't have or are not, people who have a specific app for themselves can always go to this website and just listen to the audios that are there. Also, the platform will help in putting transcripts there that will help in people who have different abilities or have different moods in terms of how they want to consume content can always read instead of listening to the content. Also, it will be a space to put profiles of the scientists that have been featured before, so that it creates a kind of a database of the scientists that are there and what they are currently doing. It will also be a space to share resources, like what scientists talk about, like links to whatever they say, or resources or books or hiking, whatever recommendations, or just anything that they talk about, and a listener is interested to know more about it, they can always get it on the resources space that I will have on the podcast website. The other thing is to help write short summaries or short blogs of what the podcast was about, because I realized as much as the podcast platform is a growing space, it's not really appreciated, and it's still a growing space, and there are people who consume content differently, like in writing or in videos, of which there's a YouTube channel for it already. But I thought it would be good to just put everything in one space. Before that, I had a Linktree link, but it's still there. But I felt like it doesn't give everything that I need on the same. So that's what the platform will be about. It will also show the services that will be offered, so that I can be able to maintain this podcast. For the past 4 months, I think. 4 months. December, January, February, March. 4 months. I have been self-financing this podcast. I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/thevulnerablescientist, but I haven't been able to get any support from there. From people, like different people, and I thought instead of by the time that picks up, or instead of relying solely on that, I can also advertise my services on website development. But at the same time, I thought like a website would be a good space to allow other people who want to work with us to reach out and to know what we are working on and just have a summary, just one place. I'm also planning to do other things with the website, but that's mainly about the website that is coming up. And I also hope to get other kinds of content on it, like infographics or animations of scientists or T-shirts or anything, any other items that will be selling on that podcast, on that website, concerning this podcast. So one of the items that I have designed in my head are cups written the Vulnerable Scientist podcast, or the Vulnerable Scientist mainly, but with the picture of an animated picture of someone who owns the cup, and maybe their name if they want to, but that's the basic. Also a shirt where in front it's their picture there, and then at the back it's the Vulnerable Scientist. So that will help provide resources to maintain this podcast. What do I mean by that? So for you to be able to listen to this audio file, I have to put it on the internet, right? And to put it on the internet, it has to be hosted somewhere. And my current hosting platform that helps distribute this podcast in different and various platforms, because we have different preferences, I use Buzzsprout. Buzzsprout, I'm using, I think, the final plan, which allows me to produce, or rather to have as many podcasts per month as possible. Yes, it doesn't give me everything that I need, but it's the best for me right now, because that's where the podcast is at. And that requires money. I pay about over 3,000 Kenyan shillings. I don't know how much that is in US right now, but yeah, and I pay it, I think, in dollars, if I'm not wrong. And that's a lot of money per month to sustain the podcast. There's also the thing where you wonder, how do I get to interview people? I don't use Zoom simply because it has its own limitations in terms of the audio quality and the length that I can record a podcast. And people, I personally don't like Zoom because we use Zoom so much in doing our stuff, and I want the scientist who wants to be vulnerable to be in a different space, not to use the same tools that they've been using. It's kind of exhausting. So I use other platforms. So the most used platform that I use right now is CleanFeed, and I use their free plan, which comes with its own limitations, but it helps to for the guests not to think about so much when it comes to downloading and all that. But it is a disadvantage on my side, since if anything happens to the internet and anything, of which I also pay for the internet, just talking about that, I pay over 3,000 for me to have a stable internet to upload the episodes and also to record and all the other things that come with podcast usage. But just back to it, if something happens, I can easily lose the recording and have to start all over again. And that comes with loss of authenticity. As you know, I don't know so much normally about the host, and I like knowing the host together with everyone else so that it is as authentic as possible. It's not like people thought about what they're going to say. It's more of let's just talk. Let's just have a conversation. Let's just talk your heart. Yes, heart out. And losing that recording always demotivates me, and also demotivates the person who's coming. As much as I try to download, sometimes I might lose some part of it and never know. So the other option that I use so far is called Riverside. Riverside.fm. Riverside there's a free plan, but there isn't much you can do. Like, I have already exhausted my free plan, so I usually use the pro plan, which is, I can't remember how much I use, but it is some it is a lot of money. But currently now I am on the lowest plan, which is 5, though it's not like, it's just for the people who've been there before. It's $5 a month, and just to store the previous recordings that I have not been able to download yet. But the ones that I've recorded, I can't download them since I have to pay for that for me to access. Now I'd have to upgrade again. Anyway, that's a whole other story. So that's I think that's mainly that. Oh, and of course, the website that I have just bought, that's 1,000 shillings per year. That's not a lot of money, but the hosting also is 1,500, and that adds onto the cost. I don't know how much I'll need more, depending on how much content I put out there. Anyway, it's a lot of things that comes with podcast production. There's also the editing. The editing takes a lot of time, and that's why of recent I haven't been able to upload the podcast episodes that I have been able to record so far. I'm thankful for the people who came in and we had a discussion, but the editing is a lot of work. I have tried to source out help concerning that from different sources, but that comes with cost that I don't think I want to discuss now. But there's a lot of cost that comes into editing an audio. There's a lot of work that goes into that. So since I mostly do that on my own, that takes a lot of my time. And if I'm to do this on a full-time basis, I need a space to do that in. That is a home, and I can't be doing nothing and hope to get rent for that space. So I need an upkeep for myself, and that is like paying me to do the editing instead of paying someone else, who would be more costly than paying myself. There's also the transcriptions. So far I've not been doing transcriptions, which is actually a very wrong thing to do in the internet space, because not everybody is able to access your content. Someone who's deaf cannot access your content. Someone who has other things that makes them not being able to access audio at the current time, then they can't consume that content. So there's that accessibility issue that comes with not having transcriptions or transcripts of the audio. Transcription comes with a lot. There are paid services to do that, but I would like to do the transcriptions on my own, or hire someone to do that, or rather help me the production in terms of these things that I've mentioned, that will make me now concentrate on now hosting and not thinking about all these things that really drag me down, and drag the podcast overall. It drags the podcast. So this, if you think about it, that's a cost of over, like bare minimum, like minimum cost of over 100K, over 100K per month. That is 100 Kenya shillings, 100,000 Kenya shillings per month. That's a lot, considering that I am not benefiting in terms of monetary value from the podcast. This is the podcast platform. It's not like YouTube. Yes, Spotify pays, but with Spotify, it's not like the paying option, monetizing option is not in Kenya currently. And this is a niche content, if you think about it. This is a very niche content. The kind of audience that we have here is a very specific niche, and it needs a lot of promotions for it to get a bigger audience, so that it can be monetizable, or rather it's sponsors can come in and do that. Plus, I'm not in a position to, sometimes I'm very skeptical about the kind of promotions that I want to make on this podcast, because this is all about honesty. And if I'm attached to a certain company that looks good on paper, but later something wrong comes with it, of course, we'll be authentic enough to talk about it, but that taints the purpose of this podcast. So I would rather try to avoid that, but if I have to, I will, just to keep this podcast moving. So those are the current things that have been happening concerning the production bit when it comes to the podcast and the money that comes with it. So I guess this is just to explain to someone who's willing to support this podcast on one way or another. You are welcome to do that. I'm going to link a PayPal in addition to the Patreon. I'm also going to link my number as I get a Lipa na M-Pesa thing for the Kenyan users, Kenyan listeners, I mean. And I'm hoping that I can get someone who will help me do this, because doing it alone is a lot, especially when you don't have, if it's the full-time thing, yes, it can be easier, but if it's part-time, if I'm going to do other things, it's very difficult for me to do this, and I don't want to stop it. I really love this space. I really love what we're doing when it comes to science communication, where scientists come in and be vulnerable, and it's good for the scientists to take care of their mental health and appreciate of what they have been able to do in years or months or days. And that will help us get better innovative ways when people are in the right state. It is also a space that will also help people who are not in science just to understand what a scientist goes through when they're doing their science, and understand them better and understand the science better, because we don't concentrate on the science. We mention a few things when to do with what people do, but we really don't concentrate on that, because that's not the main thing that the podcast does. But the agenda is to promote science, but in a different way. Yeah, I think that's it. On to the next part of this solo podcast.